Mutant Chronicles, Fiction, The Apostle of Insanity Trilogy, Volume 3, Dementia, by Michael A. Stackpole. Chapter 29. Alvarez managed to land the Sky Ray on the plateau and took the lot of us back to San Dorado. It was a bit cramped, but we were all too exhausted to notice the conditions. The rescued pilgrims were very happy with us, and a number of them made us promise that we would visit them when next we were on Venus or the Moon, or had free time on Mars. Wendy Levine, while she was working on my ankle, said that sort of euphoria was normal, but the offers were likely genuine. Back in San Dorado, the team broke apart and retreated to our neutral corners. Myself being the sole exception to that rule, I co-opted part of the suite my brother had taken in the culprit's arms. A doctor set my ankle and put it in a fiberplast cast. He also gave me a sling for my right arm, even though he could not find any permanent damage done to my shoulder socket. My brother, on the other hand, had all sorts of permanent damage to contend with. Win Raleigh is furious with me for commandeering that Sky Ray. He'd have my head on a stick, except that Anna would never speak to him again. I also managed to get Lieutenant Alvarez a medal for her part in your assault, and the Brotherhood has been very happy with the results of the rescue. I smiled at him. Did we get a letter from the Cardinal? No, because that would require explaining how Eternal Vigilance had fallen to the Dark Legion, and no one wants to saddle the unsuspecting public with that sort of information. Nick chewed a burr from his thumbnail. The Brotherhood has assured me that if our operation requires anything at all, they will move heaven and earth to provide it. Great, they can get us a spaceship so we can follow Sandra. Nick grimaced. Anything save a spaceship. Just because of shipping schedules, everything in port right now is controlled by Wynn. Either the ships belong to Capital, or they're using our storage and loading facilities at the spaceport. Of the 3 ships in port that Capital doesn't own, 2 belong to Imperial, and 1 to Bauhaus. The 2 corps not invited to our party. Exactly. We aren't moving from Mars until Wynn says we can move. I limped over to the chair in the suite and dropped down into its padded embrace. Doesn't matter at this point, because we don't know where Sandra is headed. The logistics of finding, catching, and boarding another spaceship are so prohibitively expensive and so prone to disaster that even I wouldn't endorse that sort of thing. Our only chance to get Sandra back would be to assault the location where her ship went down. The ship is still heading out away from the sun. We're looking at 3 weeks until they hit the asteroid belt, and another 3 before they reach Jupiter. 6 weeks is a lot of slack time to make up for a split-second rescue. For the first time, I began to feel Sandra was truly lost to us. That annoyed me, and I refused to surrender to defeatism. At least that would give me time to heal from the ankle break, and might be enough time for Wynn to cool down. I heard a gentle knock on the door to our suite. Nick got up to answer it, and I awkwardly levered myself to my feet using my left arm and right leg. I steadied myself against the chair as Nick opened the door and admitted Titus Gallicus. Favor of the Cardinal upon you, Inquisitor. Has Scythia abandoned you? May the Book of Laws bring you comfort, Mr. Dent, and you, Mr. Kell. The tall, slender Brotherhood Inquisitor looked rested after our ordeal. If not for the bandage on his forehead, it would have been impossible to tell he had been involved in any sort of expedition. No, Scythia is not with me, but it is on her behalf that I have come. Nick waved him to a chair. Please be seated. The Inquisitor shook his head. Another time, perhaps. I would like the both of you to accompany me, if you would. I have a car waiting down on the street. My brother draped a jacket over my shoulders and got me the aluminum cane the doctors had provided for me. Titus remained silent in the elevator down to the ground, then ushered us into a black stretch limousine. Once inside, he told the driver to head out, then smiled and rested his hands on his black-robed knees. I hope you will not think this overly dramatic, but I cannot tell you where we are going, because you are with Cybertronic, Mr. Dent. It is necessary that the vehicle's passenger compartment be totally shielded, so external communication will not work. I hope you can appreciate the need for secrecy and will make no attempt to solve the mystery of our destination. I assure you that no harm will befall you. I nodded. After eternal vigilance, I'm willing to trust you. What is all this about? Our organization, as you know, is vast and has people involved in it on various levels. Most come to us as I did, answering a divine calling to my vocation. I saw that my life could be no better spent than devoting it to bringing the Book of Laws and its message to my fellow man. It is an arduous task and often a thankless one, but this is the burden laid upon my heart, and one I struggle daily to uphold. Outside, the limousine's darkened windows. Buildings slid by as shadowy monoliths. I was impressed by your sacred warriors at Eternal Vigilance, Inquisitor. Their actions in defense of their faith were impressive. Thank you, Mr. Dent. The sacred warriors who served there were a credit to the Second Directorate. They remained loyal to the precepts that we all hold as sacred. The abbot of Eternal Vigilance might not have been as high-minded as they. There is some indication now that he sought to build a coalition with the Brotherhood that would facilitate his elevation to position of Cardinal when His Holiness completes his mission. He apparently agreed to help Lorraine Coven recover from her trauma as a favor to a friend who would be seen as valuable in the future to the Brotherhood. Nick and I exchanged glances. Titus had all but confirmed Wynn Raleigh was a Brotherhood sleeper, and apparently did so because Wynn's patron, the Abbot of Eternal Vigilance, had been exposed. Titus smiled carefully. Because we put Mrs. Coven in danger through the actions of one of our members, we felt responsible for her. Since the original Dark Legion plan called for her to be sent to Mars, then moved from here to another place, we surmised that the Dark Legion must have had a cell on Mars, similar to the one that took Mrs. Coven from Capitol on Luna. We surmised that it probably had Imperial connections, knowing Celadine Citadel was the logistical destination for Mrs. Coven, and bearing in mind the penurious nature of the Imperial citizens, we began searching for reservations to travel to the chapel, and then sudden cancellation of the same before and after her rescue from the Imperial facility on Luna. I blinked. That's one hell of a search. You should have let me know. We could have had some computers at Cybertronic do it. We have found it sufficient that a number of devoted monks employed in the proper manner could be almost as efficient as a computer. Indeed, they produced a number of likely targets that we investigated, and we finally settled on an individual we believe is the ringleader of the Dark Legion group here on Mars. Scythia took him into custody, and we wanted you to be present to witness his interrogation. My brother and I again exchanged glances, and made no attempt to hide our surprise. Nick watched Titus warily. You are going to allow us to witness one of your inquisitors questioning a suspect? The decision to do so is not without precedent. The process we use to break down resistance and extract a confession is not that much different than you employ when making inquiries of suspects. In fact, the Brotherhood views this portion of the reconciliation process to be secular. We believe it is important, especially with heretics such as this, to produce a confession without relying on theology or philosophy. Only once the heretic's errors have been shown to him in a secular environment will he be open to an exploration and recantation of his false beliefs. I frowned. Break him down as a man, then rebuild him as a person within the Brotherhood. Metaphysically speaking, there is much more to the reconciliation of an individual, and reconstruction as a human being is part of the process, but you have the core of it in a nutshell there. Titus struggled, then smoothed wrinkles from his black cassock. We are concerned with having the individual make a break with his past so we can save him in his future. As the Brotherhood is generally not part of his past, using it to break him would be difficult. But eventually he is remade in the image of the Brotherhood. much as you were remade in the image of Cybertronic. The vehicle's sharp descent down a ramp and a gradual slowing to a stop prevented further discussion of the Brotherhood's techniques for dealing with heretics. I gathered from Titus's early remarks that the reconciliation was sacrosanct. Because of that, I'd learned nothing more from him about the sacrament, so the end of our conversation was not as premature as it might have seemed. We quit the car in an underground garage and were immediately led down a stairwell to a level sunk deep into the red planet's stony flesh. I brushed my fingers over the ferrocrete blocks making up the walls and found none of the heat common on this world. I knew Nick was similarly collecting data, and that if I invoked my computer, I could get an infrared reading that would be able to approximate the depth of this level. I did not, in keeping with my agreement with Titus. I knew I always would have the chance to take such measurements on the way out, but that alone did not stop me. Something told me he was pushing the action allowed an Inquisitor by bringing us to the interrogation. While the Brotherhood might have permitted outsiders to be present before, I have no doubt they were from accredited law enforcement agencies, not civilians like Nick and me. Titus led us through a fire door, then down a short corridor and into a dimly lit room. Across from the door, a window slanted back and away to let us look down on a room beside and below the one in which we stood. I leaned on the cold metal railing and stared down into the brightly lit room. Looking up at eye level, I saw a mirror opposite my position in the other wall, confirming my suspicion that I was looking through a one-way mirror. In the room, 2 black-robed Inquisitors stood before a dark-haired heretic and plied him with questions. The heretic sat in a curious device. It looked like a wooden chair, but he sat in it so his chest rested against the back. His legs had been fastened with leather straps to boards that ran straight out from the seat of the chair, and his arms were fastened straight out on other planks that stood out from the back of the chair. It looked as if he was seated on the floor doing toe touches, then froze and fitted to this chair. It did not look comfortable, and he looked rather ill at ease. Sweat soaked the back of his t-shirt and darkened the waistband of the surgical scrub pants. I wasn't certain if he was a doctor who they had dragged out of an operation theater, or if they had supplied him with that garb. His arms were bare, likewise his feet, and his head lolled from time to time with extreme lassitude. I looked over at Titus. He looks as if he's been down there a long time. You worked fast if you found him and brought him in during the 24 hours since we escaped eternal vigilance. The Inquisitor stared down at the man. The search for the Dark Cell Legion on Mars began around the time you left Luna. Our agents arrested Mr. Woods when we set off for eternal vigilance. He has been questioned 3 times and is 2 hours into the new session. He is near breaking, and Scythia will see that he tells us what we want to know. As he spoke, a door opened in the wall below us, admitting Scythia. Woods glanced at her and stiffened his spine. Though I only saw his face and profile, I recognized the hint of a lecherous smile, and I had difficulty reconciling the idea of lust or attraction with Scythia until she moved away from the door and started to pace around the room. Her fluid grace and the fire in her eyes did make her more seductive, but I could still feel the cold press of her palm against mine when we first met. The other 2 Inquisitors quit the room, and the lights dimmed until only a single spotlight in the center pinned Woods in place. Around him, existing like a ghost in the light reflected from the floor, Scythia circled him. Passing behind him, she let a long fingernail lightly scratch along the flesh exposed where his shirt ended and his pants began. Woods started, and Scythia smiled cruelly, then made her expression more benign as she moved into his visual arc again. Her black cassock had been slit to the hip, and flashes of white thigh peeked through above her knee-length black boots. The sleeves had been shorn from her robe, and fingerless black gloves covered her hands. Eyeshadow and mascara sunk her eyes into dark hollows, while blush and rouge heightened her cheekbones and gave her a vulpine appearance. Moving sinuously, she appeared a winter vixen out to attract a mate. But when Woods could no longer see her, she became a vengeful revenant who glared hatefully at his back. "Dr. Robert Woods," she began with a seductive whisper. You have allowed yourself to become involved with forces that are evil beyond your comprehension. When you became a doctor, you took an oath. You pledged yourself to do no harm. Yet, in your alliance with the Dark Legion, you do more harm to your fellow man than you could possibly know. She stopped before him and drew her hands in an attitude of prayer, while her forearms pressed her breasts back against her chest. She stood between his arms, yet was so slender that he could reach her with neither hand. For a moment she looked innocent and virginal. A reward silently promised him for his compliance with her wishes. Woods craned his head back to look at her. You have done something horrible, Doctor. You are part of a conspiracy that has doomed a woman who could easily have been one of your patients, someone who would have trusted you completely with her life. You have betrayed her, and she is most assuredly lost for all time because of what you have done. Scythia slowly squatted down. Her cassock pooled on the floor as her knees poked free of the slits and her elbows came to rest on them. Woods' head followed her descent, keeping his eyes locked on hers, and studied her as she extended her hands and placed one each on the inside of his knees. There is a chance, of course, that you could help us get her back. You can atone for your transgression against your fellow man, and you will even be rewarded for your actions in this matter. She stood slowly, shifting her right hand to the inside of his right leg, and letting it drift in along his right thigh as she began to circle him again. The smoothness and certainty of her actions made her almost hypnotic. As I watched her fingertips pluck at each wrinkle of fabric on his pant leg, I could feel a sympathetic tickle in the inside of my own thigh. I found myself becoming aroused and wondered at how Woods, half delirious from fatigue, must have been reacting. Scythia drifted around behind Woods and ran her fingers around the collar of his shirt. Grabbing the cloth in each hand, she tugged gently, then split her hands apart. The collar snapped in half with a pop, then the cloth slowly tore in two as she pulled at it. She made her actions teasing and playful, yet the violence of it sent a chill running down my spine. With the shirt torn open at the back, Scythia peeled it off the man's sweat-slicked flesh. She let her index finger delicately work its way down his spine, leaving a red line in the valley between his back muscles. The man's shoulder blades moved beneath his flesh as she hit a ticklish spot. She let her finger linger there, then moved it on down further, centimeter by centimeter, until a droplet of his sweat hung from her fingernail, like venom oozing from a fang. Yes, Doctor, you could be rewarded if you help us. Her left hand ran up into his long dark hair. Her fingers separated it into distinct hanks. Your reward would be most delicious, more than the Dark Legion ever could give you. Then her fingers tightened, and she jerked his head back. His Adam's apple jutted out far enough to land a sky ray on it, and all the color drained from his face. Whereas he had been dreamily listening to her voice with half-closed eyes, now terror widened his eyes until I saw more white than color. His mouth gaped open, and she held his head back so far that he could not close his jaw. She stabbed her right index finger into the flesh over his spine, and a droplet of blood trickled out. Your punishment, should you choose to resist me, Doctor, will be most horrible. You can feel my finger for now, and you know where it is pointed. If I exert pressure here, you know what will happen. If I exert pressure here, you will know what will happen. Your legs will tingle, then go numb. You will see them, but you will not feel them. Nor will you be able to move them. They will be lost to you, as the woman is lost to us without your help. And if I keep pressing, you know that your loins will shrivel. You will lose control of your bladder and your bowels. And if I press hard enough, I assure you that I can do that. Your spine will be shattered and your spinal cord cut. You will never walk again. And you will spend your life sitting in your own filth, dreaming of the days when you functioned fully as a man. My stomach tightened as she spoke. I heard her words, but before she actually verbalized them, I knew what she would say. Part of me wanted to believe that I read her lips before the audio pickups in the room could feed us the sound through the speakers mounted behind me, but I knew that that was not the explanation. I had heard her before, and had heard her there, and had been where Woods sat now. That which she had used to threaten him had been done to me. As strange as it had been to watch the video of my funeral, I now found myself staring at a reenactment of my death. She released his head for a second, but grabbed a handful of hair on top of it as she whirled around in front of him. Holding his head aloft, she dropped her snarling face right in front of his frightened visage. "And you may think that you could last me out, deceive me, and that I would let you go and your masters would heal you. But that will not happen. If you do not tell me what I wish to know, if you lie to me, I will crush your skull and leave you in a gutter so rats can feed on your corpse." Tremors racked me, and I turned away before I could begin burbling as Woods did. I tasted fear in my mouth and wanted to scream for Woods and for myself, but I did not. I knew that I had been in his situation, tired, disoriented, and terrorized. I would have told her everything. I could not have resisted her, even if I had been fortified by some belief in the powers of Dark Legion apostles. Watching her work, I discovered the reason why I had murdered 2 Brotherhood Inquisitors who followed me back on Luna, though I did not remember what she had done to me on a conscious level. Somewhere down in my animal brain, I recognized the threat Brotherhood security personnel posed to me. What I had done had puzzled me and made me wonder about myself. No more. Lethal response in defense of self is no character flaw. It's a survival trait. Down below, Woods told her everything she wanted to know about Lorraine and the place the spaceship was taking her. After his 3rd confession matched the first 2, Scythia left him unmolested, and the original 2 Inquisitors came to take the man away. She came up and joined us in the observation room. My brother complimented her on her technique. "That's the fastest breaking I've seen. Fascinating protocol you use." She shrugged casually. "The others prepare the subject, and I just concentrate pressure on him, hinting at sex's reward, especially with men, makes them vulnerable. Then I threaten them with taking the lower half of their body away, and they cave in. It always works." Licking sweat from my upper lip, I looked sidelong at her. "Always?" "There may have been one exception." She smiled coldly. "But then, it's the exceptions that make the rule, don't you know?" Mutant Chronicles, Fiction, The Apostle of Insanity Trilogy, Volume 3, Dementia, by Michael A. Stackpole. Chapter 29, End.